We might picture royalty dining on endless caviar and champagne, but even Queen Elizabeth had her own food favourites, and many were surprisingly simple. From the rationing days of World War II to the lavish spreads of state banquets, her meals reflected not just personal taste, but the changing story of Britain itself. Imagine her silver spoon gently tapping against fine china as she stirred her morning tea. And while the world remembers the grand feasts, it was often the humbler comforts like berries from her own garden, a quiet cocktail before lunch, or a jam penny sandwich that stayed with her the longest. So without further ado, let's look at the 10 foods Queen Elizabeth loved. The jam penny sandwich was a simple snack in which white bread circles were spread with jam and lightly buttered, and it was also one of Queen Elizabeth II's favourites. It may sound a bit childish, but that's the point. The treat reminded her of her young days and the stability of Britain between the wars. She first ate jam pennies as a child in the royal nursery, when meals were simple and kind of like rations because the nation was still recovering from World War I. Even decades later, after banquets and state dinners became routine, she returned to this comforting treat. The sandwiches symbolised a Britain where thrift, tradition, and simplicity carried more weight than being extra and extravagant. A jam penny at tea was more than food, it was memory, a ritual of reassurance. It was this loyalty to humble flavours, rather than any elaborate dish, that defined her approach to eating. In that way, the Queen's love for such simple food told us more about her than a royal feast ever could. Queen Elizabeth's love of chocolate wasn't a secret at all, and she absolutely loved the now famous chocolate biscuit cake. Made from broken biscuits bound together with dark chocolate and set into a rich, dense slab, the cake was unusual among royal delicacies. It was simple, portable and humble, yet it became something the Queen loved to eat. Former palace chefs recalled that she would ask for it repeatedly until every last slice was gone, a habit reflecting her preference for consistency over excess. This was the Britain of post-war austerity, when ration books lingered in memory and chocolate was a true luxury to be treasured rather than wasted. The Queen's chocolate rituals mirrored that cultural backdrop, reminding her of a time when even a square of chocolate carried joy. The cake became so symbolic that it was featured at Prince William's wedding reception, showing how a private taste became part of royal tradition. For Elizabeth, chocolate was not just dessert, it was a reminder of endurance, indulgence earned after restraint, and a link between personal comfort and national history. Tea was perhaps the most quintessentially British of all Queen Elizabeth's daily rituals, and her choice was frequently Twinings Earl Grey, brewed in a teapot and poured into fine bone china. She drank it with milk, but no sugar. Earl Grey itself has a layered history. Introduced in the 19th century and flavoured with bergamot, it embodied the global reach of the British Empire. Afternoon tea, with sandwiches, scones and cakes, was a daily appointment in the palace, whether she was in Windsor, Balmoral, or aboard the royal yacht Britannia. To drink Earl Grey was to affirm the traditions of Britain itself, a small but symbolic act of nationhood. Unlike champagne toasts or banquet wines, tea was democratic and something every household across the UK recognised and cherished. That her favourite blend was accessible and well-known reinforced her connection to ordinary Britons. Besides, it also has a bunch of benefits like improved heart health, boosted immunity, and better digestion due to its antioxidants. Despite the grandeur of her position, Queen Elizabeth's breakfast table was strikingly modest. She favoured Special K or cornflakes, sometimes a slice of toast with marmalade, and occasionally a sprinkling of dried fruit or nuts. Cereal might seem mundane for a monarch. Post-war Britain embraced mass-produced cereals in the 1950s and 60s, symbols of convenience and a modernising nation. The Queen, born into a world of ration books and careful portions, appreciated this simplicity and consistency. breakfast was functional and not indulgent, and what gets simpler than a bowl of cereal? The choice of marmalade also carried cultural resonance, a distinctly British preserve tied to colonial trade and the tastes of middle-class homes. These simple meals stood in contrast to the elaborate spreads of state banquets, underscoring her preference for plain sustenance when away from the spotlight. Her cereal boxes were said to be kept in Tupperware containers at the palace, which is an almost domestic image that's a lot like something we saw in normal British households. In her quiet preference for cornflakes and marmalade, Elizabeth reflected the post-war values of routine that shaped both her diet and her monarchy. If there was one rule in Queen Elizabeth's personal dining habits, it was discipline. When dining alone, she preferred light, simple meals, among which grilled Dover sole with wilted spinach or courgettes, or grilled chicken served with salad were favourite choices. These dishes reflected a commitment to health and balance in a world that associated royalty with rich sauces and heavy courses. The Queen's avoidance of starches like potatoes, pasta, and rice was definitely different. It was much healthier and a lot like the general restraint in food after the war. The choice of Dover sole also held symbolic weight. It's a classic British fish, which is delicate but also really flavourful when made well. By keeping her meals plain and simple, Elizabeth preserved energy for duty rather than distraction. In these moments, she was not the head of state presiding over a banquet, but a woman choosing nourishment with care. It was an approach rooted in practicality and routine, the same values she embodied in her public life. The Queen's grilled fish and chicken dinners revealed that for her, food was never about spectacle. It was about sustaining the body and maintaining the discipline required of a monarch. The classic Sunday roast is as quintessentially British as Big Ben's chimes, and no one embodied that tradition more than Queen Elizabeth II. Whether roast beef, lamb, or poultry, the roast was a ritual woven into the fabric of a nation and of her own weekly routine. It echoed the time-honoured Sunday family gatherings across Britain. The Queen, however, had one unmistakable preference. She liked it well done. The roast provided a moment of direct coziness and familiarity in contrast to the luxury of official meals. The familiar texture and taste, the consistency and predictability of a good roast were what she valued most. Not fancy sauces or showy displays. It was a traditional supper that was emphasised by her self-disciplined eating patterns, tiny servings, yet significant. Thus, rather than being a transient display of royal ostentation, the Queen's love of a well-prepared Sunday roast became a silent statement of Britain's shared customs and her commitment to national continuity and modest nourishment. Potted shrimps on toast may seem an adventurous choice, but for Queen Elizabeth, it was a beloved comfort that bridged local heritage and refined simplicity. Potted shrimps are tiny brown shrimps from Morecambe Bay, gently simmered in nutmeg and mace spice butter before being packed into ramekins and topped with a preserving seal of clarified butter. Spread on hot toast, the butter melts, releasing a warm, aromatic tide of sweet shrimp. A former royal chef recalled her delight in this dish, especially how the butter melts when you spread it on toast, coupled with the delicious shrimp. Potted shrimp, which have their origins in preservation prior to refrigeration, and is practical, which reflects Britain's long history of seaside subsistence. Potted shrimp's subtle yet elegant flavour was great without going overboard, despite the Queen's well-known avoidance of strong spices like garlic. It was a homage to British regional cuisine, which is elegantly simple, seasonally relevant, and intensely personal, rather than a show of excess. Among Queen Elizabeth's food choices, the Croque Monsieur stood out as a sort of guilty pleasure. A Croque Monsieur is traditionally made with baked or boiled ham and sliced cheese between slices of pain de mie, topped with grated cheese and lightly salted and peppered, and then baked in an oven or fried in a frying pan. The bread may optionally be browned by grilling after being dipped in beaten egg. Her royal chefs recalled the delight this particular treat brought, its creamy warmth offering a break from the usual discipline of her diet. The croque's simple richness fit perfectly with the Queen's way of enjoying little rewards, just enough to savour, never too much. It showed how even a small luxury could bring her comfort and happiness. By choosing this snack, she made it clear that her joys were not found in grand royal feasts, but in quiet, satisfying flavours. It reflected her balanced style of hospitality, willing to enjoy a treat, but always with moderation and a sense of routine. Before lunch, the Queen often enjoyed a small gin and Dubonnet, a simple cocktail of 2 parts Dubonnet, 1 part gin, stirred with ice and finished with a slice of lemon. It wasn't about excess, but about sticking to a quiet ritual, much like many Britons enjoy a cup of tea, a pint at the pub, or a sherry on special occasions. The drink itself has history in Britain, going back to her mother's time, and the Queen carried on that tradition. Contrary to tabloid stories, it wasn't something she drank all day, but it was just one steady habit that gave her comfort. That balance of tradition, moderation, and enjoyment is something many people can relate to. A small treat, not too much, but just enough to mark the day. The Queen often chose food that came straight from her own estates, like pheasant, venison, or salmon from Balmoral and Sandringham, along with berries that were grown on the grounds. This wasn't about luxury for show, but about eating what the land provided, much like many families in Britain who grew their own fruit, picked berries in summer, or relied on local butchers and markets. Game meat is also really lean and filling, and her love for it reflected a healthy, no-fuss approach to eating. Even the idea of her picking berries herself brings her closer to everyday traditions. Simple pleasures most people can relate to, and she really did do that. The Queen would relax by going strawberry picking and come back with a basket of berries. One of her favourite treats was to have the strawberries she picked served with chocolate mousse or chocolate ice cream. It showed that the Queen valued honest food from trusted sources over fancy displays, something that still resonates with how Britons think about local produce today. The Queen's preference for game meats even extended to more casual meals. She was, reportedly, a big fan of hamburgers made with ground venison. She usually skipped any potatoes, pastas or grains, but almost always had room for dessert. And that's it for today's trip down memory lane. Give it a like if you learned something new about Queen Elizabeth, and don't forget to subscribe for more nostalgia. See you next time.